been almost 6 years now since I first moved abroad for the very first time to Bristol, England. Back in the day when I was young and naive and had no idea what I was getting myself into. I've talked on and off about, I think, the reasons why I went to England, the reasons why I moved abroad, why I'm here in France now. Just in case you're a new viewer here, I live in Paris, France. I have for 2.5 years now, but I lived in England before that with a little space in between when I was in Spain and the US. But that's a long story. Basically what I want to talk about in this video is what inspired my desire to live abroad. I asked you guys on Instagram if you'd rather see this video idea or a different video idea, and this one won by a long shot. So it's clear that this is a topic of interest. So I would love to know as well if you guys are also expats or have lived abroad. Please let me know in the comments what your reason was, what your motivation was. For me, there was definitely more than one reason. It can't really be boiled down to one little bullet point that makes a nice clean video. So I just wanted to chat with you guys in this video about the variety of reasons, what made me interested and why I took the plunge and why I actually moved. To get the full picture, of course, we have to go a little bit further back than when I actually moved abroad, because the first time I was ever interested in living abroad, temporarily in this case, was when I was at university. When I was about 18 or 19, I think, I was taking Spanish at university, but it was not my major. My major was English literature with 2 minors, actually, a minor in creative writing and a minor in music and violin performance. So I didn't study Spanish for a minor, but I was studying Spanish because I loved it, so I was taking classes on the side. My university had some partnerships with different universities across the world, and I did actually look very seriously at 2 different universities, one in Sevilla, Spain, and one in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I was really close to applying, definitely for the one in Argentina. I really wanted to live in a Spanish-speaking place and test out my Spanish, even before I knew that my Spanish had its limits and its limits for the classroom. Even before I knew all of that background, I still was curious to live in a Spanish-speaking place. That was obviously a very temporary thing. It would have been, I think, just 1 semester abroad. But in the end, I didn't end up applying because it was going to mess up my graduation plan since Spanish was not my major. It would have been a whole semester, but I couldn't take classes for my major or my minors. So in the end, I decided not to even apply. But that was where it started. That was where the little seed was planted. After that, when I was getting close to graduating with my undergraduate degree, I started looking at master's programs. I did apply for some in the US. I did think about staying in the US for a master's, but I was really seriously starting to look at universities in the UK, and there were a couple of reasons for this. Mainly the reason was because I really liked British literature. Everything that I was reading, I took tons of classes where I studied literature from all over the world, but of course with English literature, particularly it was American and British literature. But I really was just drawn to British literature and I loved it, especially Romantic and Victorian literature. So I started looking at UK universities and toying with this idea of studying in the place where that literature actually originated. The other reason was because I was also a tiny bit obsessed with English/British culture in general. I watched so many British movies and so many shows, read so much literature from classic as well as modern literature, and I just kind of had this infatuation with it, which I think is fairly normal. A lot of us have that for the UK or for France or for Japan. Like, tons of people have this infatuation with a culture or with a country, and for me it was the UK. So there was also that idea that actually living in this culture could be quite eye-opening because I was so curious about it, but I knew, even having never lived abroad before, I knew how different, well, not how different, I just knew it would be different actually living there. And I was curious. I was young, I was 20 years old. Yes, I know it's early, I graduated early, that's a whole other video, but I just wanted to see the world, specifically this particular part of the world. So I applied for universities in the UK and I got accepted to a few. And the one I chose was Bristol University, specifically because they had a really good literature program and they were known for Romantic literature and culture, which was my favorite, that and Victorian. When you say it like that, it's actually fairly simple why I moved abroad. I was fascinated with this culture, with the history, with the modern day, everyday life, and I was curious. I think that's the biggest thing. Even when I was looking at Spanish study abroad programs, I was curious. I wanted to see something else. I wanted to experience something else. I don't think it was ever intended to be long-term at that point. I think it really was short-term. I just really wanted to immerse myself. And with the UK, you obviously don't have any language barrier, but at the same time, one of the things that fascinated me with British culture in general is that We are so similar. I mean, it's very easy for an American to integrate in the UK or for someone from the UK to integrate in the US or Canada. It's super easy in comparison with so many other places in the world, but at the same time, that makes those little differences that you find so much more fascinating because you don't expect them. So when I would find things different with the language or with the everyday life or with just how things were done, I was so fascinated and I just wanted to experience more of that. Now, of course, you're probably wondering, how did I end up in Paris? Because I've been here for like 2.5 years now, and I'm gonna be here for a while longer, and you're probably not really seeing the tie between, you know, my British literature studies and Paris. This was not actually an original plan. It was never one of these like lifelong dreams for me to live specifically in Paris, but I discovered my love for Paris and France soon after my move. I did meet the person who I'm now married with when I was in the UK, and he's French, so that's probably the easiest way to boil down why I ended up in Paris. But there are a lot more reasons why I'm here, because I could have ended up anywhere else in the world with a French person. I don't need to necessarily live in France. I started learning French shortly after. It was a while after, actually, because I was still trying to learn Spanish. My husband and I speak English. He speaks English amazingly, and when we met, I didn't speak a word of French. French has never been a necessity for my relationship, but I did start to get very curious about it because it's his culture and because a lot of his family, all of his family, speak French, not English. I started to discover this other culture that for some reason had always been on the sidelines of everything I did. British literature, for example, especially Romantic and Victorian, relies very heavily on the influence of France and French culture and the French language. So in a way, it kind of opened the doors for a realization that I could have had years before that, and I just never did. It took me a while to actually start learning French, but I already started reading more about France, learning more about French culture, trying French food, all of that stuff. And then of course I started learning the French language, and that probably is one of the biggest reasons why I valued so highly coming to live in France. I've mentioned that I lived in Spain for just a couple of months between the UK and going back to the US and eventually ending up in France. I did live just a couple of months in Spain. It sounds silly to say live, I know, because in comparison that's nothing, and it was a temporary adventure anyway. But when I did that, I had a very strong realization that there is a huge difference between textbook language and in real life use of a language. And I knew it before, like I said, when I was looking at study abroad programs, I knew that there was going to be a difference, but actually being there for a couple of months and trying to do day-to-day activities in a tiny town in Spain, I realized very, very strongly that my Spanish just wasn't good enough to live. Despite the fact that I had gotten straight A's and I was excellent in my exams, I felt super confident in my classes, yet I couldn't use it, and it was very, very eye-opening to actually experience that firsthand. So with French, I sort of made a vow to myself that I was not going to do the same thing. From day one of learning French, I decided I'm going to try my hardest to immerse myself. I started watching hours of YouTube content that I couldn't understand, but I just tried so hard to get the immersion feeling and the immersion effect from living in the US. But all this time I kind of knew that I needed to live in France, and I really needed to be here to learn the language, but also to immerse myself in the culture, to understand what it's like to live in France. And the only way you can get that is not through documentaries, it's not through YouTube, it's not through Wikipedia, it's actually moving to the country. So that is probably the easiest way to explain why I'm in France. Actually, no, the easiest way is to say I'm married to a French person, but that's obviously only one point that sort of inspired all of these other points. How am I doing on time? Okay, I'm actually not doing so badly. I was really freaking out before filming this that it was gonna be one of these long adventures. Was trying to make notes to sort of like get all my ideas down in nice little bundles of thoughts, and hopefully I've accomplished that. In addition to these main things, there are quite honestly tons of other little things that I'm trying not to sort of add into this video to make it even more detailed and like boringly detailed. It's not even details you need to know. But basically, both the UK and France and any future adventures abroad that I have, I think can just be boiled down to an interest and a curiosity in experiencing something. And I think the more you start to realize the difference between just visiting a place, which is great and I'm still doing, and there's tons of places in the world that I want to visit but, you know, potentially never live, but you do start to realize the difference between just that and actually living in a place. And I think, for me at least, I want to visit basically everywhere, but there are also quite a few places that I would be very interested to live in and to experience from that way. I mean, there are so many things that you experience living abroad, and I'm not even just talking about the day-to-day, like how to grocery shop and paperwork and administration and stuff. Obviously that's a huge part of it as well. It's super interesting to experience, but there's even stuff just like, for example, you will notice that I still use British words in my everyday life. It's not super common because I haven't lived in the UK for quite a while and my visits to the UK have been really short. My husband does speak British English, so that might be part of it because I still hear it. But I think a lot of that is just because that 1 year living abroad was so impactful and certain things just stuck and I can't get rid of them, and I don't know if I'll ever get rid of them because I would have thought after like 5 years of not living there that I would have lost those little things. But I haven't with some of them. And the same thing is happening with France. Obviously you have even more complications here because there's 2 different languages, and I use mostly English in my day-to-day, but I do use a good amount of French, especially now that I'm working in a French office. Those things take a while to start affecting you because it really does have to be a day-to-day thing and a habit that you form. But once you form it, you start to realize that, yeah, there are more differences than you might have expected. I'm gonna wrap this up now. There are so many ways that I could continue to talk about this subject and sort of shoot off in different bunny trails, but I'm gonna stop, and let me know in the comments if there are other like bunny trail subjects that you're thinking of right now that you would love for me to do a video on, because chances are I will be happy to do a video on that. If you're interested in living abroad, speaking French, or literature, which is still something that I talk about a lot because I am a writer, I write novels, then definitely subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram because I post a lot about my day-to-day from writing and books to living abroad and Paris. So definitely make sure you follow me there, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see my future videos on whatever bunny trails end up being requested in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you soon.